Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today we're going to be doing the top 5 best decks for Portland Regionals, or essentially like the top 5 best decks in the format at the same time. So I just uploaded my tier list video where of course I ranked what decks I thought were good for Portland, and I thought I would now do a top 5 best decks for Portland video talking about what I think are the 5 best decks to play for Portland, or at least the 5 decks that you want to have on your radar going into the Portland Regionals. Of course, if you're new to the second channel here, make sure to click that subscribe button down below so you never miss an upload on the channel. And also, make sure to leave a like on the video if you go on to enjoy the video. What do you think of the top 5? I would love to hear your opinion in the comments below. Without further ado, let's get into the number 5 spot. And coming in number 5 is actually going to be Alex Szymanski's Arceus Duraludon deck. Now, Arcdura was a really good play for EUIC, and obviously Alex did win, and he even said himself that the deck is probably not good going to another tourney, but honestly, the deck has still been doing really well in post-EUIC, and the deck itself is still proving to be a very strong deck. These Arceus Toolbox type decks are really good right now, in my opinion. I really do think that, like, an Arceus box deck is a pretty good call. But yeah, like I said, Arcdura is still a fantastic deck right now, and it's still doing well post-EUIC in online tourneys. It's doing pretty good in cups and challenges too. And the deck itself is still just a very solid deck. It basically still beats the meta. Now, there are Lugia decks that will respect the Duraludon, which does hurt Duraludon's potential, but Vulpix is still pretty good. Gardevoir EX's best way to deal with Vulpix right now is to play that memory skip routes, but there are some that's experimenting with stuff like Escape Row, Path to the Peak, just any way to beat the Vulpix. This deck is still really solid nonetheless, and it still does really well. Again, Arceus decks in general are just still really good right now, and Arcdura is still a fantastic deck. Now, I definitely would say to keep your eye on Arceus Duraludon. Of course, winning a massive IC does kind of give this deck a lot of kind of legs and attention going into Portland Regionals, and I wouldn't be surprised if this deck was fairly popular. I'm sure there will be a decent amount of people playing at the Arceus Duraludon deck at Portland Regionals, and I definitely would say to keep this deck on your radar over any Arceus deck. But yeah, Arcdura definitely, I think, deserves to be number 5 on the list. We'll have to see where it places after Portland Regionals, because like I said, Alex did say it was a really good call for the tournament of EUIC, but probably not going forward. But we'll have to see how the deck does, because I think the deck is still doing really well post-EUIC, and it's still proving that it is still a very good deck in the format. Coming in the number 4 spot is going to be Mew VMAX, specifically the double turbo build of Mew. Now, Fusion Mew isn't a bad deck by any means in my tier list. I think I put it at tier 2 because I think it was a worse Mew variant, but Mew is still just a fantastic deck. I think Double Turbo Mew is definitely coming in at the number 4 spot, as it is a fantastic play. Now, there are some downsides to playing Mew. Obviously, Drapion is extremely popular right now, and due to Mew doing really well at EUIC, I definitely think that Mew will be respected pretty heavily. I think decks will start to respect the Mew matchup a little bit more with their Drapions, which is definitely going to hurt Mew's popularity and potential to do well. However, Mew is still going to be a very popular deck regardless, and the fact that Mew is just still a very easy deck to pick up and play, and the fact that it did so well at UIC and proves that Mew is still a fantastic deck in the format, people are going to still play the deck regardless, and I think that Mew will still be a popular deck at Portland Regionals. And even though people are going to tech for it, because I definitely think that you need to respect the Mew matchup. If you can put a Drapion or 2 in your deck, I definitely think you should play Drapion, or at least some way to deal with Mew VMAX, because Mew will be a problem. So whatever you're playing at Portland, make sure you have that Mew matchup figured out, because I do think Mew will be popular, whether or not it is the best, because honestly, there are people that will argue that Mew is no longer a top 5 best deck in the format, because people will respect it because of its overperformance at EUIC, but Mew is still one of those decks that will still be popular regardless. People will still play Mew until the deck leaves the format, and I think that will, of course, coast, especially off the popularity of it doing so well in a tournament. People now have a reason to play Mew again, and continue playing it for the rest of the season. So definitely respect Mew and keep Mew on your radar, because Mew will be heavily played at UIC, and it's still a very good deck. Again, being able to abuse Judge and Path right now is fantastic. Judge Path is still a very broken combo, and Mew is maybe the best deck that can abuse the combination of Judge and Path, because the Arcdura list doesn't get to play Judge Path. It isn't Arctina. Arctina gets to play Judge Path. Arcdura doesn't really get to play Judge Path. However, Mew does get to play Judge Path, which is a deadly combo and can win you a lot of games. So definitely keep your eye out on Mew, because Mew VMAX will be a very popular deck at Portland. However, I can't justify putting it any higher than number 4, because again, I do think that people really do respect Mew nowadays with the Drapions, and it just kind of hurts Mew's potential, but it will still be a fairly played deck at Portland. Next up on the list is actually going to be Turbo Lostbox. Now, Lostbox is a very interesting archetype. A lot of people will say that it is the best deck in the format. Now, I do think that Lostbox is a very good deck right now. I think the problem with Lostbox is honestly that the idea of playing it to a major regionals in a best 2 of 3 setting. You got to remember, Lostbox either gets a lot of ties or it has to win a long game 1 in order to win a set. And especially because Lostbox tends to be a bit of a harder deck to pilot. Obviously, Lostbox is a deck that you have to really play well in order to do well with, because if you're making sloppy decisions or you're not making the best decisions with your flower selects and your Colress, you're going to end up losing a game, or you're not playing well enough with Sableye with damage counter placements. It can really lose you the game. There's so many decisions that go into Lostbox that your average Joe Schmo can't just pick up a Lostbox deck and go 9-0 with the deck day 1 at Portland, because the deck is extremely difficult to play and can be very punishing for somebody to play it if they don't play it properly or well enough. Now, Lostbox is still just an insane deck, and I think in the right hands, Lostbox is arguably the BDIF, but I do think that going into Portland Regionals, Lostbox will be very popular. I think the most popular version of Lostbox right now is the turbo build of Lostbox using the Lost Vacuums, the Force Seal Stone, the Dragonite, the Raikou. Turbo Lostbox is a fantastic deck. It's also a really good deck into matchups like Mew. I think Turbo Lostbox is fine against something like Arcdura. And I think it has a decent matchup against Lugia if you sequence well. It really comes down to how well you play the Lostbox deck. If you yourself are looking at playing Lostbox to Portland, make sure you just know how to pilot the deck. Make sure you have all your matchups figured out. Because again, one wrong mistake with your placements with Sableye, your flower select decisions, your course decisions are really going to come back and bite you at the end of the game. But yeah, Lostbox is a fantastic deck. But again, because it's harder to play, I wouldn't expect it to be something that will do well enough. I'm not saying you're not going to play against Lostbox. The odds you play against 2 or 3 Lostbox day 1 is extremely high. I wouldn't be surprised if you played against more than 3 Lostbox decks in day 1 of Portland, because it's still a popular variant. People like their Lostbox. The problem is Lostbox is hard to play. But I do think Turbo Lostbox is the best way to play it. Sableye Cramsart is also really good too, but I think that Turbo Lostbox is a bit more straightforward and a little bit more simple with what it does. It's not as hard to play, though it still can be difficult to pilot nonetheless. Not saying that this deck is easy to play or anything. I'm just saying that it's the easier variant of Lostbox to pilot right now. So yeah, Lostbox is very good, and I think Turbo Lostbox is going to be the most popular version of Lostbox at Portland. And the one that you have to look out for the most. It's the best performing one right now, and the one that I think people are really going to anticipate the most going into Portland. But yeah, Lostbox is really good. But again, it's very difficult to pilot. It has to win a lot of the time a long best of 1, and it's, not easy to play. And all of those factors will take in that Lostbox definitely can't be the top deck. It's also prone to bad draws and bad decision making, which can cost you the game, which is why I can't put it any higher than number 3, because again, Lostbox is very different in an open deckless best of 1 format as opposed to a best of 3 closed deckless format where Lostbox has to have a long grind game 1 a lot of the time. So it's a lot different in a regional setting than in an online tourney or best of 1 League Cup League Challenge setting, which is why it's not any higher on this list. So this deck is pretty insane in best of 1 format. And coming to the number 2 spot is going to be Lugia VStar. Now, Lugia VStar, a lot of people say is the best deck in the format right now, and I do agree. I think the deck is very good. I really think that the number 1 and number 2 spot are very easily interchangeable, but I do really think that Lugia is not quite number 1, but it definitely could be number 1. But I think Lugia is still a very good deck. It's also a very safe pick to play if you really wanted to play something. Now, I think the best way to play Lugia right now is to probably have a Duraludon VMAX in your deck. Again, in the tier list, we talked about the idea of single strike Lugia with the Urshifu in the deck. The single strike Urshifu is a pretty cool idea to play in Lugia, but I don't think you need single strike Urshifu going forward. I think that Duraludon is just the better partner in Lugia over the single strike Urshifu, but I think Lugia is a very good deck. Whether you play the Dura or not is really up to you. Dura does help in some matchups, but also isn't super necessary. I think a straightforward Lugia deck with the T-Tar and the Stone Journer without the Dura is also perfectly fine, but Dura is also pretty good regardless, and some people swear by the Dura version of Lugia. But yeah, Lugia is a very, very good deck right now, and is easily maybe even the strongest deck in the format. In terms of raw power, because you have good type coverage with the Tyranitar, you have the Stone Journer, which is good against Arceus, obviously T-Tar being good against both Mew and Gardevoir. And the deck, honestly, is insane if it sets up. Now, that's the problem with Lugia, is setting it up. Lugia is still a little inconsistent. Sometimes it doesn't get turn to Archeops. It's very susceptible to Judge Path. Lugia can easily lose a game because of a Judge Path into a bad hand. So it definitely isn't a perfect deck by any means. It's also very reliant on coin flips, which can also be the deciding factor of whether or not your Lugia deck wins the game or not, is whether or not you're flipping heads on Mezagoza or getting the right coin flips on Capturing Aroma, or even just finding your Burnett to get your double Archeops. So the deck isn't perfect by any means, but it's still a very strong deck. And if Lugia really gets a double Archeops turn 2, it's honestly really hard to beat and is debatably the BDIF, right? So Lugia definitely is a very good deck, though in terms of consistency, it's definitely not the most consistent deck in the format, because it really does struggle against Judge Path, and it can really lose to just bricky starts. It doesn't have the greatest draw engine. Its engine doesn't really even exist. I mean, it's relying very heavily on raw draw supporters with Research Judge. Some let's play Serena, some don't. I am looking at the highest placing Lugia list from UIC for this video, and then it plays 2 Luminion. So it's not as consistent as other decks in the format. I think consistency is what's going to hurt Lugia in the long run, though the deck is still insane, and again, expect to at least play against a few Lugias in Portland Regionals, because it's still a very good deck, and a lot of people really do like their Lugia, and Lugia is a very good deck right now in our standard format, so definitely keep your eye out on Lugia going forward, because in Portland it will be popular. And I do think the Dura is maybe the optimal way to play Lugia, but the straightforward Lugia build without the Dura is also pretty good, regardless. And we'll have to see if Lugia makes any more innovations going into Portland, because I do think it does have room for innovations. We'll just have to see what innovations are made. Before we do get to the number 1 spot, I do have a few honorable mentions that I did want to list. The first one is going to be Arceus Giratina. Arctina is the second best Arceus deck right now, and it's also another Judge Path deck, and that is the big selling point behind playing Arctina. I think Arctina actually gets a little bit better going into Portland, mainly because I think it has a better matchup against Arceus Duraludon. Its Mew matchup isn't bad. I think it also is okay against Gardevoir. Some Arctina lists are starting to tech in Cleansing Gloves in their list to help against Gardevoir EXs. Giratina with the Cleansing Gloves can do 310 damage and can one-shot a Gardevoir EX. I think Arctina's probably most difficult matchup is going to be something like Lugia. If Lugia can break the path lock really quickly, then I think Arctina might struggle against Lugia, because they could just like set up a Tyranitar or Stonejourner and just go right through the Tinas and the Arceus. I guess you do the V-Guard energy, but again, I mean, Tyranitar can just put like 3 single strike energy or 4 on. So it's not a guaranteed win against Lugia. Lugia's the only way to beat it is you just have to hope that Judge Path sticks for a couple turns and you just run them over. That's basically how you try to beat Lugia with Arctina. And if the Judge Path doesn't stick, Lugia a lot of the time can very easily run you over. And I do think its Lostbox match was also a little sketchy. Against Lostbox, you have to be very aggressive with your Arceus and your Charon's Care, but Lostbox matchup is also a little difficult too for this deck. But overall, the deck is really solid. I think it has a better matchup against most decks in the format, except for a shaky Lostbox matchup and potentially an awkward Lugia matchup, depending on whether or not they get out of Judge Path. But it's still a very good play for Portland. Honestly, if I was going to Portland Regionals, I probably would have played Arceus Giratina myself. I maybe would have played the Flying Pikachu to help against Lugia, but I do think that Arctina is what I probably would have played to Portland. And then I gotta mention Goodra. I mean, Goodra's still good right now. I think the problem with Goodra, a lot of people have figured out how to beat it. Goodra has a pretty difficult matchup against Turbo Lostbox, mainly because they're very smart with how they play the deck. I think Turbo Lostbox should always be able to beat Goodra at the very least, and Goodra's still just good, though, in my opinion. It's still a great deck against Lugia, unless they're playing the Dura or the Urshi, but Goodra's still a solid deck, and a lot of people swear by Goodra's power right now, and people will still play the deck regardless. There are innovations you can make. I've seen some Goodra lists tech in the Articuno with Paralysis. I've seen some Goodra decks play a 1-1 Vulpix VStar line to help your Guardy matchup, so Goodra definitely has innovations to be made, and I think it's still a solid pick. It would probably be number 8 on this list. I think number 6 would probably be Sableye Cramzard, which is another honorable mention. Yes, Sableye Cramzard is a good deck, and a lot of people would say that it is the best way to play Lostbox right now. I think Turbo Lostbox is maybe the best way and the most popular way, but Sableye Cramzard is an easy second place behind that. Sableye Cramzard is a great deck, a little bit more harder to pilot with, how your damage output goes with Sableys and Charizard, but the deck is still good. You probably don't need the Miltank anymore or the Mawile. I think both Mawile and Miltank are both cuttable from the Sableye Cramzard deck. Maybe just playing a straightforward, more consistent version of the deck is the way to go. Maybe even teching in a Sky Steel Stone with the Drapion, or even just playing 2 Drapion to make the Mew matchup even more winnable, especially since Pablo did so well with Mew at EUIC. There's a very good chance we see, like I said earlier, Mew getting a big uptick in play, as I did put at number 4 on the list. So Sableye Cramzard is still a very good deck. It's definitely another Lost Zone deck you have to look out for. There's a good chance you play against a couple of Sableye Cramzard decks in day 1 of Portland, so definitely keep your eye out on Sableye Cramzard, as I do have it here as an honorable mention also on this list. So I think if I were to rank these, I would go Sableye Cramzard would be number 6 on the list, number 7 would be Arceus Giratina, and then number 8 would be Arceus Goodra. And I guess if you want to know what number 9, number 10 were, I guess 10 would be Miraidon, 9 would probably go to something like Inteleon Urshifu, maybe? Or Gardevoir Mewtwo. Gardevoir Mewtwo would probably be number 9, actually. I don't know. We'll see. But that's it for the honorable mentions. Now, without further ado, let's see what number 1 on this list is. And coming in number 1 is, of course, Gardevoir. Now, I have Gardevoir at number 1 because I truly think that Gardevoir is the best deck for Portland, and I also think it might be the most popular deck in Portland. Gardevoir EX has basically been figured out, right? We know the Mewtwo Guardy build is fine, but not the best way to play it. And we know that Tord basically just invented the best way to play Gardevoir. And he almost won EUIC with this deck. I really think that Gardevoir is the best deck for Portland. I know a lot of people might not agree. Some people argue that Lostbox is. Some people are going to argue that Lugia is. But I truly think Gardevoir is the best deck for Portland. Gardevoir is a very straightforward deck. Obviously, it's got the most consistent engine almost out of any deck in the format, apart from probably Mew because of the ability to spam Curlia's ability and Shining Arc on a Gardevoir. And Tord, once again, has figured out the Gardevoir deck. And Gardevoir, I think, has a fine matchup spread across the board. I think that its matchup against something like Lugia might be a little shaky if Tyranitar becomes a problem. And I do think that Lostbox can be difficult, but I think Lostbox is beatable if you just know how to play the Lostbox matchup properly, know when to use Cresselia, know when to use Zacian V, know when to save your Clap Stadium, know when to save Penny. I think the Lostbox matchup is perfectly fine. But yeah, Gardevoir is a fantastic deck right now, and I truly think it's the best deck for Portland. I think that it's just a really good deck. It's hard to beat. It's really hard to beat if it sets up, and when it sets up, it sets up. Its draw engine is insanely consistent. It's always able to really chain together what it's trying to do, and there are innovations to be made. Obviously, you can play multiple copies of Memory Skip Rolls. You can play an Escape Rope. Escape Rope boss would basically just allow you to easily beat the Vulpix. You can also play Mimikyu EX. I've seen Gardevoir really try to innovate that matchup. You can also play Path. So yeah, Gardevoir is really good right now, and I highly think that it is the best deck for Portland. I think that it might be the most popular deck in Portland in terms of meta share. I think it is definitely the best deck for Portland, in my opinion. Gardevoir is really good right now. It's doing really well in online tourneys. It's doing really well in League Cups and Challenges. It is by far the best deck right now, in my opinion, and I truly think it is the best deck to play for Portland, or the best deck to keep your eye out for Portland. It is the one that you definitely want to beat for Portland Regionals, and I have it at my #1 spot here on this list. But that'll be it for me on today's top 5 best decks for Portland Regionals video. Let me know what you thought of the top 5 down below. Do you agree or disagree with any of my placements? Do you think anything maybe should have made the list? Let me know. I am curious to hear your opinion on the comments below. Let me know if you're going to Portland Regionals too in the comments. I, of course, unfortunately, will not be attending Portland Regionals. I was going to go originally, but now I'm not going. But I will be attending Hartford and Milwaukee, which I can't wait to do content for those things too. But yeah, that'll be for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Catch y'all later, and bye-bye.